Good afternoon, everybody. This is Paul Lewis with the Eno Center for Transportation. Welcome to our webinar today. This is one of many in our series of webinars where we hear from interesting people talking about interesting projects and issues in transportation around the country. Today we are joined by Chris Jones. Chris is the Senior Vice President and Chief Planner at the Regional Plan Association in New York City. Chris, in this capacity, Chris directs research and planning for the RPA, and he's been at RPA since 1994, leading multidisciplinary initiatives to improve economic, social, and environmental conditions in the New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut region. He led the research and policy development for the 2017 Fourth Regional Plan, and he has also managed a federal sustainable communities initiative, and before the RPA, Chris was special assistant to the deputy mayor for planning and development in New York City. Today, Chris is going to talk about a February report that the RPA released called A Preventable Crisis, the Economic and Human Costs of a Hudson River Rail Tunnel Shutdown. So we're going to hear a lot about the research that went into that, some of their findings, and since then, some of the political decisions that have been made to advance proposals to break the logjam that has prevented the Hudson River tunnels from being repaired and the capacity expanded. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Chris. He will present the results of the paper. We will then move to a question-answer session. If anyone on the line has a question, please submit that via the questions function on your webinar panel, and we'll be taking questions after his presentation. So, Chris, please take it away.
Great. And thank you, Paul. And many thanks to the Eno Center for giving us this opportunity to talk about our findings with a national audience. And even though the effects of what's happening with the Hudson River Tunnel are felt most acutely here in the New York area, we see it very much as a national problem, and I hope that's part of what we're able to convey here today. And for those of you who don't know who Regional Plan Association is, we're a nonprofit planning and policy organization that's primarily concerned with the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut region, although we sometimes address national issues concerning infrastructure and development as well. And for this study, we partnered with Airfare, the multinational professional services firm, to answer a single question. And that was, what would happen if we lost one of the two passenger rail tracks under the Hudson River? These two tracks serve 450 Amtrak and New Jersey Transit trains with 200,000 passengers each day. The tunnel itself is over 110 years old, it's over capacity, and it was badly damaged by Hurricane Sandy. And Amtrak's Gateway project would build a second tunnel with two additional tracks that would allow service to be maintained while the existing tunnels are repaired. It would also double the capacity for rail service and includes a number of other improvements to infrastructure on the New Jersey side and at Penn Station. So the project has a wide range of benefits that go beyond just preventing a disruption of existing service, but for the purposes of this study, we just focused on what the impacts would be if the existing tubes had to be repaired before a new tunnel was built. And the tunnel is effectively a choke point for both commuter and intercity service stretching from Washington, D.C. to Boston. When rail service in this corridor is disrupted, it not only affects rail passengers, but also spills over into highway, air travel, and freight networks. And the economy of the Northeast region that it serves accounts for 20% of the U.S. gross domestic product. Now, this isn't the need for additional rail capacity under the Hudson is far from a new idea or a new need. As a matter of fact, RPA was proposing, new rail tunnels under the Hudson back in its first regional plan in the 1920s. It was a major recommendation of our third regional plan in the, in the mid-90s, and was one of the leading priorities of our fourth regional plan that we just came out with in 2017. And the road to getting to where we are today was, was kind of a long and complicated one. Interagency planning for, for a new
capacity to service growing Trans-Hudson demand started in earnest in the 1980s with some interagency planning that was where the term access to the region's core was first joined. And following a major investment study in the 1990s, planning began in earnest, and the ARC tunnel project received FTA approval in 2006. By 2009, we had both approvals and funding agreements, and construction was actually underway until then New Jersey Governor Chris Christie canceled the project, citing the high cost of the project and cost overruns as the reason for cancellation. And just parenthetically, if that project had continued, we would, and stayed on schedule, we would have a second tunnel in place today and would be able to do the repairs that we're talking about and have expanded capacity, at this moment. But following that, Amtrak unveiled its gateway proposal, and as that was moving forward, Hurricane Sandy, badly damaged the, both of the tubes in the tunnel, as it did several other tunnels in the New York area, which raised the urgency for pushing the project forward. In 2015, there was an agreement with the then Obama administration to fund the, just the tunnel portion of the project, and the environmental impact statement proceeded. It was actually completed in early 2018, but we are still waiting for for approval of that EIS from USDOT. They've still not signed off on the project, and the Trump administration said they aren't bound by the funding agreement that was in place earlier. There's no alternative funding package in place at the moment, so we are at a state of stalemate at the moment. And the longer this goes on, the more likely it is that the existing tunnels will have to be repaired before before new tunnels are in place. And if this happens, the way it would proceed is that one tunnel would be taken out of service at a time, and take about 2 years to repair each of the tracks. But even though still have one of the two tracks operational, service would need to be reduced by an estimated 75%, because of the constraints of having incoming and outgoing trains passing each other on a single track. Now, we had to make a number of assumptions to make the calculations that we did in the study, and again, we only looked at the impacts of a temporary shutdown. We assumed for analytical purposes that this would be a planned shutdown, that where the timing would be known several months in advance at least. But there's also a possibility for an emergency shutdown if there's another storm or other damage or deterioration that that requires the tunnel to be shut down without much warning. We also didn't project when the shutdown would occur, and it could occur at any time, given how conditions proceed and whether there's any other outside occurrence which forces things to happen more quickly. We assumed that we would be with one track for a 4-year period, with at most 6 trains per hour. And for this, we assumed that 5 of those trains would be New Jersey Transit commuter trains, down from over 20 an hour in the peak period now, and 1 Amtrak train per hour, down from the 2 trains they operate currently. We also did not figure in any impacts from mitigation measures that any of the transportation agencies might undertake, the Port Authority, New Jersey Transit, and others. They undoubtedly would if this was to happen, and that might dampen some of the impacts that we're talking about. But they also come with their own costs and effects that that could cause disruptions in other ways. So but that was not part of the calculations that we made. And I think overall there's a limited number of things that you can do just because the transportation network itself is so congested at this time. And so just to cut to the bottom line immediately here, we estimated that
this 4-year shutdown of the Hudson River Tunnel would cost the national economy $16 billion over 4 years, and the bulk of that were in the cost to people who are traveling by a train, a bus, or a car, either commuting or traveling intercity for it. But there are significant costs also to delivering freight, to air travel between cities in the Northeast in particular, and also just the cost to health and safety from increased auto accidents and air pollution. And one of the main points of this is that even if you never take a New Jersey Transit train or an Amtrak train, this would affect your commute, your economy, and quality of life. So even though it's only between 35 and 40,000 New Jersey Transit passengers that we think would be displaced, by a shutdown, more than 500,000 travelers, along with millions of homeowners and businesses, would be affected. Delays in the in trucking and the freight network would end up costing over $1 billion. Travelers between Washington and New York City, or Baltimore and New York City, would have fewer options and would see airfares go up as a result. Tax revenues would be reduced by an estimated $7 billion. We likely to see an additional 90 to 100 deaths as a result, primarily from increased auto accidents, but also from the health effects of increased air pollution. And the one that got a lot of attention, but is sometimes the hardest one to see immediately, is that home values would also decline, near transit stations or train stations where service would be reduced, and those values we estimate would decline by about $22 billion, and I'll describe that a little bit more later in the presentation. And we do consider this to be a conservative estimate. There are a lot of things that we think would happen as a result that we didn't feel we were able to, quantify well enough to put into this equation. For one thing, as I said, it could be an emergency shutdown rather than a planned shutdown. It doesn't factor in the buffer times that people would figure into their commute, because service would be so much less reliable than it is today. And we've certainly seen that, when either subway service or commuter rail service has been shut down for temporary periods of time. We didn't try to estimate the impact on commercial real estate, how much it would stress an already overused infrastructure system. And then some of the hardest ones, how much would this affect regional, even national competitiveness? This would obviously be a very big, black mark on the, on reputation for the infrastructure system in the Northeast and the nation, which, doesn't have a very good reputation today. And we would be adding this onto an already stressed transportation system. So the compound effect says when other parts of the system would go down, were also other things that would be factored into what could occur. So we're comfortable with our overall number, and certainly we can quibble about particular pieces, but I think as an order of magnitude, we're comfortable that it would be, at least this amount. And as I said, the people who would be most affected would be, just looking at the commuter side of the equation for a second. We'll get into the intercity part a little bit later, but with about 67,000 people taking a New Jersey transit train during the peak period today. With the trains that would still be in service, about 29,000 would be still able to get in during the peak period if you use these to capacity, meaning that there's about between 35 and 40,000 that would have to shift to other modes. And we think that about 20,000 of those or so would be able to get onto a PATH train or a bus, but others would either be diverted to auto or they wouldn't take the trip at all, which would have a different type of economic impact on the region. So these 38,000 people that would be diverted, ripple through the rest of the system here. As I said, that's what would happen on the left, is what would happen to the 67,000 people who take New Jersey Transit today. But there's also, another 170,000 people who take transit, into the city, who would see more crowding, more delays, because there would just be that many more people who would crowd onto those systems. And a total of, almost 250,000 auto users would see an increase in their commute of about 10 minutes or more per day, with about 100,000 of those losing as much as an hour today. And that's because it's when you have a highway network that is pretty much at capacity during peak periods, as it is today, and you add even 10,000 more cars onto that network, it just creates an exponential increase in the amount of congestion that people see when they're going through that network. So this just shows of those 245,000 people that we're talking about, just how it breaks down in terms of the amount of time that's added to their commute, with, as I said, 100,000 over an hour, many of them over 90 or 120 minutes that would be added to that commute. And one of the points we tried to make is this is not just people who are traveling into Manhattan who would be affected by this. And we have a number of vignettes in the report where we try to put a human face on what would happen to people. And this is just an illustrative example that we have of somebody who, drives from, Monmouth County in South Jersey to East Rutherford in the north central part of the state, and, has a, fairly predictable, comfortable hour-long drive today, which would approach something that would be close to 2 hours, and just how that would, with the additional traffic that would occur with the tunnel shutdown. And we, talked about what that would happen in terms of when she would need to leave, how it would disrupt family life at home. So really, it's as much the human impacts of what happens with this as much as the dollars and cents impacts that occur. And we looked at, how this would affect intercity travel. If you basically reduced Amtrak service by half during this time, and originally we thought it would force up congestion at the airports, but because the FAA already has a cap on the number of plane movements at the major airports in this period, what it would do instead, as more people look to fly as an alternative to taking the train, it would increase demand without increasing supply. And from Economics 101, we know that increases price. By our estimates, you could see as much of a doubling of the price between Baltimore and New York City, and an increase of as much as 2/3 between Washington, D.C. and New York. And that would, effectively, price out, marginal travelers, people who are, who don't have a business expense account, leisure travelers who would affect tourism, small businesses who don't have, the wherewithal to make that trip on a regular basis. And here's another example of just how it might affect somebody who, have to travel between Washington and New York City on a regular basis. So a 3.5-hour trip today could end up taking, nearly 6 hours under the scenario that we presented. And as I said, these affect not just people who commute or even travel on a daily basis, but from a study that we did about 10 years ago, looking at how much home values increased near train stations when train service improved as a result of major capital investments, on New Jersey Transit. We were able to calculate how much, home values near train stations went up during that period. If you take those same assumptions and work it in reverse, you can see the effect of, home values likely to decline, just because the homes near train stations just become that much less attractive. And because there are so many homes in New Jersey that are near these train stations, it could accumulate to a $22 billion loss in value, with the secondary impacts of reductions in property tax revenue for the towns and villages that rely on those revenues. And then finally, just the just because you're putting that many more cars on the road, you start to see increases in accidents. Some of them, would likely be fatal. There's a monetary cost to it, but certainly the human impacts are what would be most serious from it. So those are all of the kind of highlighted findings that we wanted to share with you. We're happy to talk both about just any of the details or assumptions behind it, but also kind of what sort of impact we've seen from it. So with that, I'll turn it back to Paul, and happy to answer any questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. That was really informative, really interesting. We've had a bunch of questions come in while you were talking. Again, to folks that are on the line, please take all of your questions and enter them into the questions chat function on the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be able to take those questions as they come in. There's a few questions about whether this webinar will be recorded and slides be available. Yes, the webinar is going to be recorded. We're going to post that on the website by tomorrow morning. So if anyone's curious about that, yes, it will be posted online. And we have a couple technical questions about the presentation. One is, if the Hudson River tunnels need to be shut down, how would that impact the Long Island Railroad, which also uses Penn Station?
Right. That's a good question, and we looked at it. It's probably not going to have a major effect on the Long Island Railroad because they come in from different tubes and tunnels, and actually you would have more space within Penn Station itself, which the Long Island Railroad shares with New Jersey Transit. That's not to say there wouldn't be any impact at all, because anytime you disrupt service and have to reconfigure how tracks are used and how trains move in and out of the station, et cetera, it can start to have ripple effects on other services. But we didn't find that there would be kind of a major impact on the Long Island Railroad.
Got it. A couple questions about ownership of the tunnels. Believe that these tunnels are owned by Amtrak, and if the capacity were to expand, would they also be Amtrak-owned tunnels, or would they be owned by some other facility?
Yes, they would continue to be owned by Amtrak. They would, Amtrak is the owner. They're responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the tunnels. They're, as today, where service is shared between Amtrak and New Jersey Transit, that would also continue. Exactly how the service would operate, would be subject to, agreements between Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, and other service providers.
Got it. A question about bus traffic. So talk a little bit about how you guys accounted for the availability of intercity bus services like Bolt Bus, Greyhound, Megabus to replace rail service during any kind of shutdown.
Sure, and it's important to recognize, just as with rail service, there's a difference between commuter trains and intercity trains. There's also a difference between commuter buses and intercity buses. And for commuter buses, that's the first thing you think of. Well, people will just, if they can't get on a train, they'll shift to a bus. The problems with that is that the buses don't necessarily, one, for many people, it's a much slower trip. It's a much less attractive trip, because you can't, do the same sort of work you would on it. But also just from a capacity question, the constraints on running more buses and getting more people on the buses is to some extent where you park the buses once they get into Manhattan. And the Port Authority bus terminal is pretty much full up at peak period with buses in and out of there. So it's you really don't want more buses parking on the street during that. So that's so that was a constraint. So we really did not assume, and we also heard but didn't kind of look at just constraints on the number of bus drivers who would be available as well. So we assumed that you would operate the same number of buses, but that the number of people taking those buses would increase a certain extent, that their loads would increase from about 75% to about 90%.
And then one more question on the kind of technical component. The governor has announced that the prospects for congestion pricing in Lower Manhattan, does that affect some of the analysis that you guys put together?
Well, we didn't factor congestion pricing into the analysis for this, and it certainly would likely have some impact, but the impact would likely be minimal because where you get the most congestion effect out of this is at the Lincoln and Holland tunnels, and the price that people would pay going through the Lincoln and Holland tunnel to get into Manhattan wouldn't change under the current congestion pricing proposal. So if you're paying the tunnel fee to go in, you wouldn't pay the congestion fee on top of it. But certainly there would be some impact. We didn't try to model that at the time, though, since it wasn't, the details of it weren't available.
Got it. So I've got a bunch of questions about the Gateway project. Gateway is the proposed project that could solve a lot of these problems. Can you talk a little bit about the current status of Gateway, and kind of is there a path forward to addressing some of these problems?
It's effectively a political issue here. I don't have any great insights to what might be happening in terms of negotiations in Washington at the moment. I will say that after we released this report, there was some additional activity. Senator Schumer from New York, proposed to introduce legislation, that would allow funding to move forward, or construction to move forward without a funding agreement in place, if the states could be reimbursed once that funding formula happened. Representatives King and Gottheimer from New York and New Jersey made a proposal for having plans in place for if a shutdown could occur. And certainly there is, we have been, pushing forward with activities to kind of try to break this logjam. We staff a coalition called Build Gateway Now that, that is, both, putting out educational efforts, mobilizing, everyone from the business, advocacy, labor and other communities to try to make the project happen. So we're hopeful that with that amount of momentum moving forward, that something will happen, but I don't have any particular insights at it at the time.
Got it. So, a big part of your analysis talked about how this is a national problem and not just a problem for the New York, New Jersey region. But one of the questions I have here is, so how does that compare with a $4 billion annual impact in relation to a nearly $20 trillion national economy? How do you make the case that this truly is a national issue?
Well, partly it's because, and again, I just want to reiterate, we kind of looked at just one piece of the problem for it, and so we didn't look at kind of the broader impact that would happen if you did have this additional capacity, which we feel would help the entire Northeast economy to grow. But even so, $16 billion is far from an insignificant figure for what would happen over a 4-year period of time. I think it's the issue you have, such a large economy that with so many different facets to it that, no one thing is going to, unless you're talking about macroeconomic policy, is going to make that big a difference. But I think for an infrastructure project, if you start with, this temporary impact, and then look at what it might do to some of the intangibles that I talked about in terms of national competitiveness, what it would, what some of the ripple effects might be to supply chains in other parts of the country that we weren't able to estimate, and then more importantly, what it would, really do moving forward in terms of, allowing for economic growth that can't occur in the, in the corridor at the moment.
Got it. A couple questions that have come in relate to a similar problem on the other side of Manhattan, where the MTA's L train cable cracking was fixed kind of suddenly, in that they were planning on shutting down that line for a long time, and then they found an alternative solution that dramatically reduced the need to do that. What prospects are there for kind of alternative thinking on this tunnel, and trying to make alternative fixes so that we can avoid some of these issues?
Sure. Well, the Gateway Development Corporation that's responsible for the project is looking at that. They're looking to see if anything that was that came out of the whole L train process could be applied to the Gateway tunnels. I think the prospects for that are pretty slim for a couple of reasons. One, even the accelerated process for the L train is controversial in and of itself. So that there's not necessarily agreement that was the best way to go for that project. Even as it moves forward. And the Hudson River tunnels are really a different animal. They're for one thing, the cables that are used to supply the power are have much higher voltage and are much more heavier and more difficult to move or repair than the ones in the Canarsie tunnel that the L train runs through. It has a different type of track bed that makes it much more difficult to reconstruct, and it's a longer, deeper tunnel. So so there are all sorts of complicating factors that I think would make it more difficult to apply than what's being applied to the L train.
Got it. So we're at the half an hour point. I know that we try to keep these short to be respectful of folks' time. But one final question before we end is let's hear a little bit about your thoughts on the crystal ball question. What do you think is going to happen next? What are the next steps? And what's your predictions for the tunnels 10 years from now?
I'm an optimist by nature, so I think that's really all to go on with this. I mean, I think this is so clearly such a such a priority from a national infrastructure and economic perspective that that I have to believe that that we will come up with a solution at some point that's going to allow the project to move forward. I'm less optimistic that it will be done in time to avoid some type of partial closure, and it could look like the scenario we painted, or it could look like a series of of temporary disruptions because it has to be closed for a few weeks at a time to repair, and that happens increasingly over time. So unfortunately, I think with how things are moving at the moment, we're going to have to go through some additional pain before it's resolved.
Fair enough. Okay, well, thank you, Chris, for joining us, and thanks everyone on the line for tuning in. Again, this will be posted on the website tomorrow, and we look forward to hearing everyone on the line next time. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.